I was sitting there, looking at my 12-year-old son Leo as he laughed and told me about his soccer practice, when my phone vibrated on the table, and the message on the screen turned my entire world into a cold, hollow nightmare. Get up and go. Don't say anything to your son. Don't look at him. Walk out of the restaurant right now if you want him to live. My heart didn't just drop. It felt like it had been ripped out of my chest by a frozen hand. I could feel the blood draining from my face, my vision tunneling until all I could see was that glowing screen and the blurred shape of the boy I love more than life itself across from me. He was mid-sentence, reaching for a breadstick, completely unaware that an invisible predator was watching us from the shadows of this crowded bistro. I had to make a choice in that split second. Do I scream for help and risk a bullet or a blade finding him? Or do I obey a ghost and abandon my child in a public place without a word of explanation? Was I wrong for what I did next, or would you have risked everything and stayed? I need you to listen to how this started, because looking back, the signs were there for weeks, hiding in the mundane details of a life I thought was safe, but was actually a house of cards waiting for one text message to blow it all down. To understand how I ended up paralyzed in a booth at Mario's, you have to understand the 3 months leading up to that dinner. My name is Mark, and for the last 5 years, it's just been me and Leo. His mother, Elena, passed away when he was 7, and since then we've been an unbreakable team. I work as a senior analyst for a logistics firm, a job that is boring, predictable, and pays well enough for us to have a comfortable life in a quiet suburb. I've never been a man of mystery. I don't have enemies. I don't owe money to the wrong people. I'm the guy who mows his lawn on Saturdays and volunteers for the school bake sale. But about 6 weeks ago, things started feeling off. It began with small things that I dismissed as my own exhaustion. I'd come home and the back gate would be unlatched, swinging in the wind, even though I knew I'd locked it. I'd find a window in the basement cracked open an inch when I was certain I'd closed it for the winter. Then there were the hang-up calls. My landline would ring at 3 a.m., and when I'd answer, there would be nothing but the sound of heavy, rhythmic breathing and the faint, unmistakable clinking of metal against metal, like someone playing with a set of keys. I told myself it was just kids playing pranks, or maybe a telemarketer's automated system glitching out. I didn't want to be the paranoid dad. I wanted Leo to feel like our home was a fortress of safety. Every morning, we had our routine. I'd make pancakes, he'd complain about his homework, and we'd drive off into our separate worlds. But that routine started to feel like a performance. I began noticing a silver sedan that seemed to be parked 2 houses down every time I pulled out of the driveway. At first, I thought it was just a visitor for Mrs. Higgins next door, but then I saw it again at the grocery store, and again near Leo's school. My heart would race, but I'd tell myself I was imagining things. I even started taking different routes to work, turning down side streets just to see if the silver car followed. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't, but the uncertainty was like a slow-acting poison in my veins. I remember one specific night, about 3 weeks before the dinner, when I was sitting in the living room after Leo went to sleep. The house was silent, but then I heard a faint scratching at the front door. It wasn't the wind. It was deliberate. I grabbed a heavy flashlight and threw the door open, but the porch was empty. All that was left was a small, hand-carved wooden soldier sitting on the welcome mat, an exact replica of a toy Leo had lost at the park 3 years ago. That was when I realized this wasn't a random prank. This was someone who knew our history, someone who had been watching us for a very, very long time. Then the physical evidence started appearing. One morning, I walked out to my car to head to work, and there was a single, wilted white lily tucked under my windshield wiper. It felt like a message, a funeral flower, but I laughed it off, thinking maybe a neighbor's kid was being weird. But then a week later, I found a photograph tucked into my mailbox. It wasn't a picture of me. It was a long-distance shot of Leo standing at the bus stop, his back turned to the camera, wearing his favorite blue hoodie. There was no note, no ransom demand, just the silent implication that someone was close enough to touch him whenever they wanted. I went to the police, of course. I showed them the photo, the flower, told them about the calls. The officer, a guy who looked like he'd seen too many real crimes to care about a creepy photo, just shrugged and said it could be a disgruntled coworker or a neighbor dispute. He told me to get a security system and call back if someone actually tried to break in. I felt dismissed, shoved aside, so I took matters into my own hands. I installed cameras. I started driving Leo to school instead of letting him take the bus. And I became the shadow that followed him everywhere. He started to notice, asking me why I was so clingy all of a sudden. He'd get frustrated when I wouldn't let him walk to the corner store alone, or when I'd check his bedroom 3 times before I went to bed. How do you tell a 12-year-old that a nameless shadow is stalking him? You don't. You just lie and say you want to spend more time together. I started skipping work meetings just to sit in the school parking lot, watching the perimeter, my eyes darting between every person who walked by. I was becoming a ghost of myself, losing weight, my skin turning gray from lack of sleep. I spent hours on the dark web and forums, searching for any mention of my name or my company, thinking maybe I'd stumbled onto something at work without realizing it. I reviewed every spreadsheet, every shipping manifest I'd touched in the last year, looking for a discrepancy that might explain why someone was targeting us. But there was nothing. I was just an analyst. My life was numbers and logistics. It didn't make sense. Why us? Why now? The week of the dinner, the pressure reached a breaking point. I started getting texts from an unknown number. They weren't threats, at least not at first. They were observations. Leo likes the pepperoni pizza more than the cheese, one read. He's getting tall, almost as tall as you, said another. I was losing my mind. I changed my number, but within 3 hours, a message came through on the new one. You can't hide behind digits, Mark. I was living in a state of constant, vibrating anxiety. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours a night in 10 days. Every shadow in the corner of my eye was a hitman. Every car that lingered too long at a red light was a kidnapper. I decided that we needed a night of normalcy. I thought that if I took him to a crowded, brightly lit restaurant, a place filled with families and witnesses, we would be safe. I chose Mario's because it was his favorite, and it was always packed on a Tuesday night. We sat down, ordered our drinks, and for the first 15 minutes, I actually started to breathe. I watched the steam rise from his spaghetti, watched him smile, and I thought, maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe this is just some sick game that will eventually stop if I don't give it oxygen. The restaurant was loud, filled with the clinking of silverware, and the hum of a dozen different conversations. A birthday party was happening 3 tables over, and the laughter of children felt like a shield. I remember thinking that no one would dare commit a crime here. It was too public, too bright. I reached across the table and ruffled Leo's hair, feeling a surge of protective love so strong it made my chest ache. And that's when the phone buzzed. That's when the text told me to walk away and leave my son sitting there alone in a restaurant, or he wouldn't live to see the dessert menu. My world vanished in an instant. The laughter around us became muffled, as if I were underwater. I looked at the waiter walking by with a tray of drinks, looked at the couple sharing wine, and realized that among all these people, one person was looking at us with a cold, calculated intent. So that is the horrific reality I was facing, sitting there in that booth while my son asked me if he could get an extra soda. I was being told to abandon my flesh and blood to an unknown fate, or watch the unthinkable happen right in front of me. Before I tell you what I did and the absolute chaos that followed, I want you to pause right now. Go down to the comments and tell me, honestly, what would you do? Would you follow the instructions of a stalker to save your child's life, even if it meant leaving them defenseless, or would you grab them and run, praying you're faster than a bullet? I really need to know if I'm the only one who would have reacted the way I did. I looked at Leo. His eyes were so bright, so full of trust. My hands were shaking so hard I had to tuck them under the table. I didn't look around. The text said not to look. It said if I scanned the room, they would know, and it would be over. I felt like there was a laser sight trained on the back of his head, or mine. I stood up. My legs felt like they were made of lead. Leo looked up, confused, a bit of sauce on his chin. Dad? Where are you going? He asked. His voice was so small. I didn't answer. I couldn't. If I spoke, I would break down, I would scream, I would ruin the deal this monster had offered. I just turned my back on him. I walked toward the exit, every step feeling like I was walking through deep water. I heard him call out my name again. Dad? Is everything okay? I kept walking. I pushed through the heavy wooden doors of the restaurant and stepped into the cool night air. My heart was slamming against my ribs so hard it was painful. I stood on the sidewalk, tears streaming down my face, waiting for something. A gunshot? A scream? A van peeling away? Nothing happened. The street was quiet. Then my phone buzzed again. Good boy. Now walk to the alleyway behind the pharmacy across the street. If you call the police, he dies. We are watching his table. I crossed the street like a zombie. My mind was a storm of guilt. I had just left my son alone. What if they took him while I was walking? What if the text was a lie just to get me out of the way? I reached the alley, my mind racing through 1,000 scenarios. Was this a kidnapping? A hit? When I turned the corner into the darkness of the alley, I saw a figure standing by a dumpster. It wasn't a hitman. It wasn't a masked criminal. It was a woman, her face partially obscured by a hood, but as she stepped into the light of a flickering street lamp, I recognized her. It was Sarah, my wife's sister. The woman we hadn't seen or heard from in 4 years. We all thought she had vanished into a life of addiction, or moved across the country to escape her grief. She looked haggard, terrified, her eyes darting around like a trapped animal. "Mark, thank God you listened," she whispered, her voice cracking. I grabbed her shoulders, nearly shaking her. "What is this? Where is Leo? Why did you threaten him?" She grabbed my wrists, her grip surprisingly strong. "I didn't threaten him, Mark. I was protecting him. They're here. The people who took my sister, they're here for him now." My brain stalled. "What are you talking about?" "Elena died of a heart condition, Sarah." "What do you mean took her?" Sarah looked at me with a mix of pity and horror. "She didn't die of a heart condition. She was a whistleblower for the firm you work for. She found out they were moving more than just logistics. They were moving untraceable assets and high-grade chemicals for people you don't want to know. She was going to testify, and they silenced her. I've been in hiding for years because I knew too much, and now they know Leo has the encryption key she hid in his old teddy bear. Elena knew they were coming for her, Mark. She didn't tell you because she wanted you to stay clean, to be the safe parent. She gave that bear to Leo for a reason. They aren't going to hurt him in the restaurant, Mark. They're going to wait until you're both home, and take you both out so they can search the house without interruption. I had to get you away from him so I could get to him first without them noticing you were onto them." As she spoke, a black SUV roared past the alleyway, heading toward the restaurant. Sarah pulled me deeper into the shadows. "That's them," she hissed. We watched from the darkness as 2 men in suits stepped out of the vehicle and walked into Mario's. My blood turned to ice. They weren't there for dinner. They moved with a professional, chilling efficiency. I didn't think. I didn't wait for Sarah's plan. I took off running back across the street. I didn't care about the text. I didn't care about the danger. I burst through the doors of the restaurant just as the 2 men were approaching Leo's table. He was sitting there, looking terrified, tears in his eyes, holding his phone as if he were about to call me. One of the men was already reaching out a hand toward Leo's shoulder, wearing a fake, predatory smile. I didn't shout. I walked up behind him, grabbed him by the back of his shirt, and practically hauled him out of the booth. The 2 men froze, their hands going toward their jackets, but the restaurant was too crowded. They couldn't do anything without making a scene. I stared them down, the raw, primal rage of a father protecting his cub boiling in my blood. "Touch him and you're dead," I growled, a voice I didn't recognize coming out of my throat. I didn't wait for a response. I shoved Leo toward the kitchen, screaming for someone to call 911. I grabbed a heavy glass carafe from a nearby table and smashed it against the edge of the booth, brandishing the jagged edge. "Get out!" I roared. The patrons began to scream. Chairs scraped against the floor, and the chaos that erupted was my shield. In the confusion of shouting waiters and crashing plates, I got Leo out the back door where Sarah had pulled up in a beat-up sedan, tires screeching. We scrambled inside, and Sarah floored it, fishtailing out of the parking lot just as the 2 men emerged from the front of the restaurant, reaching for their waistbands. We didn't go home. We drove for 6 hours, the silence in the car only broken by Leo's quiet sobbing and Sarah's frantic directions. She explained the depth of the corruption at my own company, the things my wife had seen, and the danger we were in. It turned out the heart condition was a lie manufactured by the company's doctors who were on the payroll. She had been poisoned with a substance that mimicked a cardiac event. And the encryption key? It was exactly where Sarah said it was, hidden inside the stitching of Leo's worn-out teddy bear he'd kept since he was a toddler. We stopped at a motel in a different state, and I sat on the floor with a pocket knife, carefully opening the back of the bear. There it was, a small silver flash drive wrapped in plastic. That little piece of plastic held the names, the bank accounts, and the shipping logs of a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. We spent the next 3 months in a safe house provided by federal agents after Sarah helped us turn over the evidence. It was a grueling process. I had to testify before a grand jury, reliving Elena's death and the terror of that night at the restaurant over and over again. The logistics company was dismantled, its executives arrested for everything from money laundering to murder. The 2 men in the restaurant? They were caught trying to flee the country a week later at an airport in Florida. My life is different now. We have new names, a new city, and a yard with a much higher fence. I no longer work in logistics. I work for a nonprofit now, something that doesn't involve shipping manifests or secret assets. But the cost was high. Leo is safe, but he doesn't look at me the same way. He remembers the moment I stood up and walked away from him without a word. He remembers the look on my face when I abandoned him. He understands why I did it now. Sarah and I have explained it 100 times, but the trauma of that abandonment is a shadow that hasn't quite left his eyes. He has nightmares where he's sitting at a table and everyone he loves just disappears. I have to live with the fact that to save his life, I had to break his heart. Every time we go out to eat now, he sits with his back to the wall, his eyes constantly scanning the entrance. We are free, but we are not the same. Looking back, that text message was the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced, but it was also the only thing that saved us. It forced me to see the world for what it really was, not the comfortable lie I'd been living. I learned that day that sometimes, to save the people you love, you have to do the one thing that feels like a betrayal. It's a heavy burden to carry. Knowing your child's safety was bought with a moment of pure, unadulterated fear. If there's a moral here, it's that the people closest to you might be carrying secrets you can't even imagine. And the world is much smaller and more dangerous than we like to admit. You never really know who is sitting at the next table, or what they're capable of. Like this video if you think I made the right call by leaving the table, or tell me in the comments if you would have stayed and fought right then and there. Subscribe for more stories about the hidden dangers in everyday life, and share your final thoughts on this whole mess below. Do you think Leo will ever truly forgive me for walking away? I'll see you all in the next story.